Hey guys, and happy Monday. I made it an entire week. I don't think I've made an entire week of regularly scheduled things ever. And it was only 3. So good job. Anyway, in keeping with the theme of rationalizing my purchases, this video is going to be about exactly what the title says, 11 reasons why I got my new camera. That is, more specifically, 11 things that this camera can do that my old camera can't do. By the way, my new camera is the Panasonic Lumix G6, which is kind of a step down from the Panasonic GH3, which you've probably heard about if you've looked into DSLR video making and stuff like that. And the camera that I used before this was the Panasonic Lumix GF2, which, if you're familiar with Panasonic's camera lines, the GF2 was the successor to the GF1, which was kind of like the GX1, and the GF2 was supposed to be more like the GX7, except it kind of became the lowest end compact thing, and I was kind of disappointed with it. Then again, I made the mistake of getting it on like the first day it was available, so don't do that with cameras. Do your research, find out exactly what they can do, because this thing was kind of a disappointment, but that's my fault. So, reason number 1 that I got the G6. Manual video mode. I can't tell you how disappointed I am that this thing did not have a manual video mode. It has a video button, no manual video mode. It's all automatic video. You get the widest aperture that your lens can possibly get, and there's absolutely no control over the video mode. It's pretty much the exact video mode that my old Canon PowerShot had, which I was kind of disappointed in because I paid more than I should have for this. With manual video mode, you can control absolutely every aspect of your video, and that's something that I really like, being able to control the aperture and the exposure, and all of those technical things that technical people like. I'm a technical person, so I like those things. Reason number 2 that I got the G6, 24 megabytes per second, 24 frames per second, 1080p video. That's a mouthful, but basically that means that I record at a higher quality per frame than I could have recorded with my old camera. The GF2 maxes out at 1080i, so that's 1080 interlace that you later convert into 1080p to do anything useful with it. 30 frames per second, I don't even know how many megabytes per second, but this is better. Essentially that means that you can get more dynamic range in your shot, and you get less all of the bad things, more all of the good things. So that's good. I'm probably going to make a video a little bit later explaining dynamic range and how your bitrate makes a difference in that, and other myths and other things about dynamic range, so stay tuned for that. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't made it yet. So, yeah. Essentially, that means, again, that it can take better videos than the GF2. Reason number 3, Wi-Fi that allows me to completely control my camera from my phone, which I'm not doing right now, but I could be. Sorry, I just ruined the illusion for you. And that same Wi-Fi allows me to transfer pictures from my camera to my phone, where I can share them directly, or from my camera to my computer, where I can edit them and store them and stuff like that. And that's useful because, drawback number 1, this camera has, like this camera, its SD card mounted in the bottom with the battery. So that means if you have your camera mounted to a tripod or a dolly or a crane, I'm not going to use a crane anytime soon, who am I kidding? But if you have your camera mounted to anything, you don't necessarily need to take it off in order to get pictures or video off of your camera. That being said, videos usually take a little bit longer than they are to transfer over to your computer. So a 2-minute video will take like 2.5 minutes to transfer over, which isn't bad, but it's also time that you could spend taking it off of the tripod, taking the card out, and putting it on your computer in 30 seconds. So, reason number 3, Tilty-flippy capacitive touchscreen that I'm not poking right now, but I'm pretending I'm poking. I know, I'm ruining all of the illusion for you. And again, the GF2 doesn't have a flipping screen. I know the GX7 kind of has a flip screen, which is useful, but the great thing about a flip screen is I can watch myself and see when I'm in the frame and things like that. Couldn't do that with this. I was gonna make like a periscope that let me do that, but this saves the workaround very much. Also, The GF2 is one of the first cameras Panasonic made, it might even have been the first, that had a touchscreen. The problem with this touchscreen is it was a resistive touchscreen, so it means you actually need to put force on the screen in order to get it to work. This screen, however, is, like all touchscreens these days, a capacitive touchscreen. That means it works just like your phone or your iPod or anything that you have that has a touchscreen. It works much better, it's very accurate. The screen resolution is great. It also has a viewfinder, which this doesn't have built in. And that's also a good screen. I'm not really a fan of viewfinders, or at least electronic viewfinders. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I have a hard time focusing on them. I don't know, that's my thing. But it has a very nice tilty-flippy screen, and that's thing number 4. Reason number 5 that I got the G6. Focus peaking. This is something that Panasonic's previous Micro Four Thirds cameras desperately lacked. A way to properly focus in manual focus mode while using the screen or the viewfinder that gives you a little aid as to whether an area is in focus. In practice, I've found that focus peaking on this camera isn't the best that it could be. It gives you a little bit of blue static around areas of contrast in areas that are supposed to be in focus. This works very well if you're doing a static shot, if your camera is on a tripod and what you want to focus on is not moving. But if the thing you want to focus on is moving around at all, it creates a little bit of motion blur, and that renders the focus peaking pretty much useless because it can't tell where the areas of contrast are. That said, I do use it, I have the feature enabled, and it is useful when you're focusing on yourself from a distance and you're pointing the camera at yourself from your phone, which I still think is really cool. You can control your camera from your phone, it's awesome. What was I saying? Number 6, I mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. This camera has a viewfinder, and the only reason a viewfinder is more useful than a screen is when you're using your camera in the field. And by in the field, I mean outside. And by outside, I mean that place that I never go. Because the one downfall of all screens is that in direct sunlight, you can barely see anything, so it is very useful to have a built-in viewfinder so that you can actually use your camera where cameras are made to be used, which is outside, that place that I never go. Reason number 7, the G6 has a built-in intervalometer. This means that you can use the G6 to get time-lapse shots and things like that without actually needing to plug in a remote that has an intervalometer on it. So it's all self-contained in that regard, and it's kind of awesome like that. You can just set up the camera to take a time-lapse sequence at a certain time of day, put in your settings, and set it and forget it, and it does that. Usually. However, the first time I tried to do that, I made the mistake of setting my focus manually, and what I forgot about these drive-by-wire lenses that use motors instead of, like, lens moving components, is that whenever the camera turns off, it sets your focus back to wherever it is by default. So my focus for the entire shot was completely out because the camera turns itself off between shots to save battery. So the one thing I learned about that feature is to set it to autofocus and just set your autofocus region and you can forget about it. Either that or to use a manual lens, set your focus manually, and no electronics, no problems. Reason number 8. In addition to your normal physical camera shutter, this camera also has the option to turn on an electronic shutter. But why, you might ask, would a real Micro Four Thirds camera need an electronic shutter when it has a real shutter? Well, I might answer, it is very useful when you don't want your loud shutter noise annoying people. Or, I find when you're doing time-lapse shots every 50 seconds and you don't want that annoying people. That's where an electronic shutter is really useful. However, electronic shutters, by their nature, do have a downside, and that is jello. You're probably familiar with the jello effect if you've ever done DSLR video, and that is the fact that it's a progressive scan and it takes in one part of the screen before the other, and if you move it back and forth, you get the jello effect. Same thing, just for a still image. So if you're shooting anything fast moving, the electronic shutter is definitely not as good, but if you're doing anything that's locked down or repetitive, or you don't want an annoying shutter sound, then the electronic shutter is very useful. Reason number 9. This camera, in addition to having a built-in intervalometer, also has a built-in function that actually creates time-lapse videos. Now this is of course something that you could do in software later, you just import all your images into your program and put it into a video yourself, with your own settings. But doing it this way is actually extremely convenient. It creates an MP4 video at up to 1080p, I believe, and 30 frames per second, and just puts all those frames into that video, and you have yourself a time-lapse shot. As long as you're alright with it being 30 frames per second and MP4, then you're golden. And thing number 10, don't worry, we're almost there. This camera also has a built-in stop-motion compositor. So basically you can take a sequence of images that you took using your camera as a remote so you don't shake the camera, and make stop-motion animation right in the camera. That's something I haven't seen in a lot of cameras, and I think it would be a really useful function to use in some creative, artistic way. I'm not a creative artist, so I can't tell you for sure, but it probably would be used in a creative, artistic way by a creative, artistic person, should they so choose to do that with that. And finally, reason number 11 that I got the Panasonic G6, it has a microphone input, which is how you are hearing this beautiful, clean audio right now. There is, of course, a limitation to this. It does have a microphone input, but it doesn't have a headphone output. So you can get better audio than you otherwise would be able to, but you can't listen back to that audio to see if it was actually any good. You just have to trust that your settings were good, and that you caught the right things, and that you don't have much background noise. But if you have the right microphone, then it's alright. Obviously, if you want a camera that has all the bells and whistles, but not Wi-Fi, you would get the Panasonic GH3, which has better movie functions, it has a little bit better shooting stuff, you can buy more accessories for it, but I think for the value that the G6 brings to the table and the pretty much comparable features, except of course for the high bitrate video mode, that the G6 is actually a great alternative. But if you want all the bells and or whistles, the GH3 would be the camera you're looking for. I have to say though, I actually got this camera for less than I paid for this piece of junk, and I got this one with an extra battery. So this is an incredible camera for the price. I do have to say though, just as a side note, that Panasonic seemed to purposefully make this camera feel a little bit cheaper than the GH3. For instance, the GF2 that was supposed to be a kind of high-class, very compact micro four thirds camera has an all-metal construction, or at least mostly metal. There's a little bit of plastic, and the G6 has exclusively plastic on the outside. There are also places where the screws on the outside seem like over countersunk for some reason. I don't see why it wasn't possible to cover those up or to make them flush with the outside, but it kind of just gives it a little bit cheaper of a feel. And other people have also made comments about the quality of the plastic that they use on this camera, and before I got it I thought that was kind of ridiculous. Plastic is plastic is plastic, and like, what do you expect out of plastic? But actually handling the camera, it does seem like all of the plastic was molded in a mold that was a little bit too rough. They could have made it a little bit finer and it would have felt a little bit higher quality. That being said, that's just the external look and feel of the camera, and it actually does handle quite nicely. I like all of its functions, its customizable external buttons, and I think, as I've said before, it is a wonderful camera for the value. So that's 11 reasons and a little bit of review on why I got the Panasonic Lumix G6. They're not a sponsor, although if they'd like to, I would not stop them from doing that. I can always use new camera stuff. And now I need to go work on 4 other videos that I'm kind of behind schedule on, so you'll see me on Wednesday.